90% of startups globally fail. When it comes to African startups, around half of actually African startups fail. Over 75% of countries that have gotten to Series B funding, they spend $400,000 every month in spend. That is bonkers. Kenya, for instance, raised around $680 million in VC money last year. Yeah.
Our market isn't as monetizable as an EU or a US. People are just not going to get into, a $5 subscription for a CRM or for some tools. So we wanted to touch on an issue that many people have talked about. This isn't anything new, but we want to see if we could give our nuanced take or our experienced, or more like you experienced take, because you're the one who went deep into this. But it stems from one simple question. Why are African startups failing?
Why are African startups failing?
Yes.
Why?
And I think you had laid out a number of things that you had found interesting. But maybe you can first give us a brief context. Give us some big figures or some examples that we can ground ourselves on, and then get into the meat of it. Yeah.
So let me lay the groundwork in terms of statistics. First of all, I'd say this is a topic that I approach with fear and trepidation.
Is it because you're also...
One, because I'm also part of a venture-backed startup, but also because it is humongously Herculean and difficult to build a startup that's successful. Anywhere in the world, full stop. So I'd even go ahead as to say, if I was a capital allocator, which I'm going to be very soon, help me God, I'd probably back 2-time or 3-time founders. I'd probably back. Sorry, man. Hey, you're having this call, and I'm feeling like it's kind of Bluetoothing to me over here. But anyway,
bro, you already got it.
I'm already in. But anyway, so I was saying, I feel like I'd also back like 2 or 3-time founders, even if they have had a previously failed startup, if we can be able to get to the reason as to why it failed.
Or if they can explain why it failed.
Yes. If they don't even need to explain, even
why not
with my own research.
Why not back success instead of back
obviously, in terms of priority, I'd definitely back successful exits, like founders with successful exits.
Are there people who have failed at startup 1 or 2 times just because they're bad at startups, not because...
Yes, that is true.
How do you
of course, you apply nuance. It's going to be super subjective, man. Yeah. Depending on like someone's past experience, depending on like the circumstances that led. Because
your gut feeling.
There's also like, I won't even deny, there's a humongous percentage of startups that fail because of mismanaged or poor governance or just bad leadership in general, right? So obviously you have to, if I'm a capital allocator, I have to filter my lens through such reasons, of course. But let's throw in like a couple of big statistics. 90% of startups globally fail. 90%. And even of the 10%, very few succeed exceedingly, like above expectations.
They've made it to heaven, but they smell of smoke.
So let's start with that global statistic thrown out there. To bring it a bit home, when it comes to African startups, around half of actually African startups fail, which is interesting. So that would actually mean that more, like globally speaking, or like on average, yes. For different statistics. I didn't believe this statistic by the way, but around between 48 to around 54% of African startups fail. And then I'd even go deeper as to say, and then now you can rebuttal, 20%, again, the sources are a bit variable, but some say 20% fail in the first year, and I think around 45% fail within the first 5 years.
Okay. And let me ask, when we define startup in this case, I start a restaurant. I'm guessing I don't qualify as a startup. Because the reason why I think it feels shocking to say 50 is because I also think that, especially in the African context, at least in the Kenyan context, people starting businesses, which would not qualify. You just you start a shop. That's not a startup, but it's business. And to that extent, there are even many more failing in that sense. They just would not make it to the cut where we call this a startup.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere like over 2 million businesses are started up like every year in a country like Kenya. But when I talk about startups, I'm talking about businesses that are being built for massive scale.
Massive scale.
And two, may strongly have an element of funding.
Yeah.
Either venture funding or like formal funding from financial institutions. So that's the qualifying statement for me.
And does
when it comes to
technology weigh that distinction?
Yeah,
The usage of technology or them being...
it may or may not actually be heavily like technology based. It could just be even like a logistics startups that runs operationally very well through like Excel or spreadsheets.
But it doesn't matter.
However, the scale that they're attacking that particular problem is massive. So that for me would be the definition.
Venture-backed startups built specifically for scale.
Yes, with external funding. So in my research that I did, those are the categories of startups. I tried to compare them globally. We can get into that later.
Yeah.
But I'd say the top 2 reasons that people cited failure for startups, at least from my reading, which now led me to the insight that I got, was 1, lack of product market fit and misaligned market assumptions, and 2, funding shortages and cash flow problems. So when you let's break down the problem in first principles, a startup fails because it runs out of money.
Yes.
That's the bottom line.
Every business that fails,
yes,
essentially just not money.
So these 2 reasons that I've said, many conflicting papers that I've read cite 42% and 38% of the reason as to why these businesses fail. So in essence, these contribute like the majority of failure as to why a lot of these startups fail. So I started thinking in my head, like, if it's lack of PMF and misaligned market assumptions, maybe we should define product market fit for like our audience, and then we can get back into explaining it.
Yeah. So for those who have been, most people who've done startups, I've read, the Bible,
Yes.
the lean startup.
The lean startup by
You talk about a product problem fit, where is your product solving the problem in the market? And then that takes you to the next stage, which is the product market fit, where is the market really interested, and
Is it really
are they requesting for your product hard
Yes.
enough?
Yeah.
I don't know if I could give an example. There was a story, I don't know what it is, but there was a story I was reading about, there are some people who tried to sue Rockstar because
Rockstar Games.
because GTA 6 was taking too long.
Ooh, interesting.
That is product market fit. When
Yeah.
your customer wants to sue you,
when your customer wants to sue you because your product is late.
yes, because they're waiting for your product.
Do you think Apple still has the PMF it used to have?
Okay, let's not
Okay,
confuse
let's-
things.
let's not-
Let's not confuse things. But what I've said about them in
Uh-huh.
passing is that for them, there's a huge aspect of their success is the product market fit, but a huge part of it is the branding.
True. You remember, like, when we used to read, what is this book? Start with Why,
Yeah.
by Simon Sinek.
Simon Sinek.
It was like people heavily resonated with the vision that Apple sold.
Yeah.
Not really the product that it sold, being different, to think different. They always started with the why, and the why communicated. So in essence, branding, like the visionary branding was a message that was so strongly resonating with people.
and
But I
that's-
feel like they've lost that now.
Yes,
That is for me the biggest problem.
that's what they're losing in the sense that
Losing.
their technology isn't worse than the competitor. They're probably still ahead. If you look at like the M chips and all these things, they're still ahead. They still have a sense of quality that others may not match, or a sense of panache that other companies may not be able to get close to. But when people looked at Apple before,
It was
everything they did defined
defined the category,
Excellence.
defined
Yes.
the excellence. Like you knew them to be this.
Recently, they came out with the liquid glass thing.
Yeah.
And in the next beta update, they walked it back.
They walked it back.
That was a level of confidence that,
And it's actually the same as like the many things that they've dropped recently over the last 2
yeah,
years.
those who know Apple for the longest time, or what we've seen from Apple for the longest time, they were so bold, they were so confident in who they are,
Defining a
that
category.
they would just say, we're doing this. A lot of bold moves. I mean, removing the headphone
iPhone-
jack.
the headphone
People
jack.
talked about that from, till the end of time. But right now, they're in that place where I think even they don't truly believe in the strength of their
brand.
position or their brand.
Anyway,
But we're getting off track.
Yes,
we're talking about Africa, man.
Yes, we're talking about Africa, and we're talking about lack of product market fit as being the first cited reason, and misaligned market assumptions. So I wanted to double click on that misaligned market assumption because that formed the basis of something that took me into a rabbit hole. I realized when many founders go and raise, first of all, like you have to communicate a vision that's compelling enough to attract FDI, like a lot of foreign direct investment. That's a lot of VC firms. And the biggest thing that they're looking for is actually like a scalable idea from day one. They want to fund like the boldness of a founder. Team at the early stage usually comprises a lot. Like it has like a humongous weighting as to whether or not you actually get like funding, right? But then also like the boldness of the scale of the market that you want to.
Let me ask a clarifying question in this case. When you say misaligned market assumptions,
yes,
you're not talking about the founders, you're talking about the venture, the people pouring capital into these businesses.
It's actually twofold.
Okay.
So I feel like many founders have gotten the playbook where you want to sell the lofty idea. You want to sell the most scalable idea.
You're selling a dream.
You're selling a dream
to people who have been backing much bigger companies before.
Yes.
So you, in a sense, you feel the pressure that you must match that level of scale or that size.
Exactly. Because really, comparatively, our peers in the US are talking about getting to 1 million ARR in 6 to 12 months. You're in Africa, you're in Kenya specifically, you're talking about getting to the same, like annual revenue in the same 6 to 12 months.
What I wanted to find clarity on, when you say market misalignment, is it from the perspective of the founder or from the perspective of the people pouring capital into these startups with an expectation that they're going to, make it as big as as their local markets? Because, again, a lot of this funding isn't local per se.
Yeah.
It's foreign.
One, I think what leads to a lot of market misalignment is a little bit of both. So, from the founder perspective, the comparatives for most of the African startups that are raising money, especially VC money, would be looking at their peers in the valley and trying to sell very lofty goals, very lofty scale to like say, hey, we're going to be running the same, 1 million ARR when you give us like this injection, $500K or $200K US dollars, within 6 to 12 months. So people sell really lofty scales, like big total addressable markets, for instance. And then from the VC side of things, I think it's that push for, it's rocket fuel. The moment you have like VC money, we're expecting you to be growing and scaling. However, the big problem, in my opinion, which now leads to the second problem, is while a sizable number of African startups will actually raise money. Let me even get into a little bit of those statistics. So I've read somewhere, and I have slides for it, Kenya, for instance, raised around $680 million in VC money last year. This is like 29% of all VC money that came into Africa. I think the number is around $2 billion, which is 0.6% of the global VC money.
Yeah.
So you can already see the scale with which
people
VC money perceive Africa. And then Africa has a lot of interesting quirks when it comes to market misalignment that I actually now sat down to synthesize, and it made so much sense.
Because I remember every once in a while, you'd be on LinkedIn and you'd hear someone talk about they've just raised a certain level of funding. They've closed around at this valuation. Now, I don't know the exact valuation of a company like M-Pesa, but when I was looking at what they said their valuation is, I'd ask myself, if I were to compare this to organization, are you telling me that your business, your market size is just as big as this local company? But because of the fact that M-Pesa is just a local business, it's the biggest kind of business, full stop, here in Kenya. But then the valuation that, I don't know, some CRM or someone doing a road deliveries.
Some pitch book or Crunchbase page.
It's like they talk about as if they're on the same level. And that's when I kind of knew, this cannot go anywhere. because eventually you have to make money. Eventually you have to make a return on this investment.
Correct.
And the fact that you set yourself is such a
high
goal.
bar. Now, let me actually double click on that. There's a couple of so many interesting statistics that I got. Let me start by comparing Africa against the rest of the world. So just listen. Africa, population, and you can have this table somewhere here. Population-wise, Africa compares to India, China, EU, actually India and China at around 1.4 billion people in 2025 estimates. LATAM, Latin America, has around half that number, 0.65 billion people. EU even has less, 450. And the US even has the least. That's 0.3 for around 340 million. But now here's the thing. Our GDP.
300 million.
Yes, 340 million.
Okay.
So, but our GDP in Africa, the purchasing power is the lowest.
Of course.
Where we have at around $3 trillion market estimates in 2024, compared to LATAM, that has half the population at 5 trillion, compared to, India is almost comparable to Africa at around, India has more though, 3.7, Africa has 3. And then, of course, China, EU, 18 trillion, and then the US, 27 trillion. So that brought the first argument of the lowest averaging purchasing power in Africa to be like the one that significantly hampers businesses. And then when you think about it...
And at the same time, you have to also put the demographics into play here.
Yes.
So I believe it's 75% or more of Africa's population are under 35. Correct. So you're also looking at people who, even age-wise, probably still don't represent a market that are able to pay,
purchase,
to have that purchasing power.
What's interesting is that I think the projected consumption right now for 2025 is at 2.1 trillion, which is already lower than the 3 trillion that happened last year. While the US is already above 10, EU is already above 10. Like, so many of the comparative markets already have higher purchasing power compared to Africa. So that's the first thing. So when we think about it this way, even B2B businesses normally end up serving businesses that are ending up serving the final consumer. So the ARPU, the average revenue per user, in general, if it's low because of the low purchasing power, it already streams up to the big businesses, which brought me to the first assertion was it's easier to build a P2B unicorn than to build a B2C unicorn. Because a P2C unicorn in Africa already are contending with very low average revenue per user. But at least in a B2B, there's more concentration for capital flows among businesses. So that was the first assertion. However, that brought me to the second problem that brings a lot of market misalignment in Africa. I told you about, I think we've talked about this before, but Africa is one of the most fragmented markets that you could think about. We're talking about 54 sovereign states, over 40 currencies, dozens of regulatory regimes, and over 4 different languages, like lingua francas that are predominant language groups that are predominantly
and multiply that by cultures.
Yes, even multiply that by cultures. So when you think about EU, for instance, has been really heavy. It has done a really good job to harmonize a lot of regulatory frameworks. So when you think about things like, imagine you're running a logistics company and you need to comply with 3 different countries, importation rules that are they're not regulatorily harmonized. Or a good example would be in the space that I'm in. A big problem about running a Pan-African fintech, for instance, is thinking about licensing in all the major regimes.
Each country with its own licensing.
I would say, I'm just going to throw this rough number, I'm not going to say if it's true or not. Imagine it costs you between $100,000 to $500,000 to be adequately licensed in one market in Africa. Deploy that in almost even, let's just go with all the regional hubs. That becomes a humongous problem. While in Europe, if I hold, let's say, a license in one of the EU states, I'm already, I'm good for business. in all 27 states. Maybe I only think about Britain right now because of Brexit. And then the US, a couple of states gives you, you can passport whatever permits and licenses that you have in one to operate in any. And then, of course, China is like one big block, 1.4 billion people.
Same as India.
India, same thing. So that alone already brings in a lot of misalignment. Because you see now, a founder has to communicate that, hey, I'm building a Pan-African business here, but the reality of scaling to a Pan-African reality is much more difficult compared to your peers.
Yeah.
So I don't know, if this is something that you've seen, because, okay, for instance, from where you sit, you guys, Google, you have a lot of distribution, but are all markets easier to get into in Africa?
Of course not.
Compared to...
think about it. If you are trying to do something and you have to go to Ethiopia, which has such a huge population, anything to do with fintech, already was like a no-go zone.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are two things that I'd want to highlight, even as we talk about failure of startups in Africa, and these are more internal facing. So one, staff. People, I remember we had this discussion a while back. We were like, you need to go raise money in Westlands, but operate in Githurai. Like you need to, your operational cost must be much lower, simply because of the fact that you know that your monetization cannot match, to look at the people in the Bay Area or in Silicon Valley and then assume that those traits apply to you one-to-one just does not apply. You have to be much more
resilient. We should be thinking about
making the most out of. But then you find that there are teams with such a huge
bloat.
Yes. And so the only way they can get by even 1 month is through venture funding.
I actually was thinking about, so here's a weird reality. Most companies that have raised Series B, I think I was reading a statistic, over 75% of countries that have gotten to Series B funding.
Startups.
Yeah, startups. They spend at a minimum $400,000 every month in spend. That is bonkers. It is actually bonkers. But here's the problem. The catch-22 about venture funding sometimes is if you don't deploy as much, the question comes, why then do you need this much to scale? So now it's like, it's not really chicken and egg, but it's more like, I feel like a venture builder in Africa has to be a lot more prudent than comparative markets.
Yeah, you have to be very wise about it, because yes, you do want to raise as much as you can, but nonetheless, that should not make you make a decision that will you see, the ultimate cost is that you go out of business.
Yeah.
So you'd rather raise less and yet still survive. When we're having the discussion about the Arc browser, we're talking about how it's important to make money from day one. It might not necessarily mean translate to profit, but if you have a way of making money, you're always getting a sense of, at what level do I need to be to stabilize the ship?
Yeah.
What more customers do I need? What more units do I need to sell?
You
How many
extend
more
your runway.
subscriptions? Yeah. So even when I'm asking, even if I get over $1 million, $1 billion, I still know that in the back of my mind, hey, this is the target that we need to get to, just to make sure that we're always afloat.
Yeah.
And
so it's not growth at all costs. It's revenue at all costs. Yes. Like revenue from day one.
Yes. But you see, as you said from your earlier point, that it's a misalignment on the market.
Yeah.
Our market isn't as monetizable as an EU or a US. People are just not going to get into, a $5 subscription for a CRM or for some tools. You have to be very... And again, a lot of the people who is here making money in our industry are people who do with fintech, who are taking a slice of a transaction. Because selling a subscription, to be honest, is very hard.
It's very hard.
Selling a software product is very hard. And so you have to contend with that. You have to contend with the fact that people are not as empowered to commit. Yeah, to commit to something that probably is many deem as leisure.
Yeah.
Or are good to have, are nice to have, not a must have.
A nice angle that we should attack sometime in this pod is like business models that thrive.
Yeah.
Because you're basically arguing SaaS-based products versus like transactional volume-based products, right? Well, you're trying to maximize the GTV, you're trying to maximize like the processing volume that you're doing because you're making a cut out of each and every transaction that you're doing versus like subscription-based businesses and things like that, or freemium based. We should actually discuss a bunch of those businesses and those models.
We should take a look at the business, because we've not mentioned any business in this, any startup in this.
Actually, I'm deliberately avoiding those businesses because you can read. You can read up. I mean, like,
But it will be interesting to look at the
biggest
models.
exits. Okay,
And
why?
How
the
that did
models
not
that
translate to
Okay, that's actually a good,
survival.
That's a good angle you can look into. I was thinking about, like, when you think Pan-African, maybe it's better to think of Africa as regional clusters, because while there is a lot of fragmentation, there is, of course, like, still a lot of homogeneity between different clusters. Like, when you think about the East African bloc as one, yes, we do have, like, nuances when it comes to things like licensing or passporting licensing and stuff. However, there are very common features between, like, countries in the East African bloc. When you look at South Africa, especially with SADC, when you look at Francophone Africa, the dynamics are not really the same, because there's a whole host of different nuances that you have to consider. However, treating those markets as blocks is a good way to go. And then you also don't need all 54 markets to begin with. The power law also applies.
Yeah, the power law applies.
So,
Someone's going to make much more money with just one market.
to just one market, as compared
Yes.
to like all being present in all 50 of them.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think let's call it an end at this particular point.
Yes.
However, we have to double click on. We must double click actually on business models. I think that's a very interesting angle.
Do let us
to
know
look into.
if that is an angle or a story you want us to get into.
And we will drop names.
We'll drop names and have choice words.
Actually, I don't know if we'll have choice words. Okay, maybe we will. Let's see.
We'll see. We'll see.
We'll have choice words.
If you've enjoyed watching us fight for our lives, as we try to give you great content, please drop a like, a subscribe. If you're unsubscribing, don't forget to hit confirm. If you please follow us on. We said we're not on Discord or not on X. Just follow us wherever you see the word admin access. Just click like,
Instagram,
follow,
TikTok.
yes.
I think that's where we are now.
And we'll see you guys on the next episode.